Having finished with the blood, let's talk about what pumps the blood, namely the heart. I'm with stupid. Ain't that the truth? Okay, so anatomy of the heart, about the size of your fist. Located right behind your sternum, really, in the mediastinum, between the second rib and the fifth intercostal space. On the superior surface of the diaphragm. Notice how the heart really comes down and almost sits right on the diaphragm. 2/3 to the left of the mid-sternal line, 1/3 to the right. So people say your heart's on your left. No, your heart is really right behind your sternum, but it's at an angle, so that about 2/3 of it is to the left and about 1/3 of it is to the right. Anterior to the vertebral column, posterior to the sternum. So notice it's protected on both sides. It's got nice bony protection. The sternum protects it from the anterior, and the vertebra protect it from the back. Enclosed in the pericardium, a double-walled sac. So pericardium goes around the heart. You should have learned about this in Bio 201. The pericardium, the pericardial cavity. So let's look at it again. Pericardium. There's a superficial fibrous pericardium. That's really tough tissue for protection. Anchors, prevents overfilling. Then there's a deep two-layered serous pericardium. Remember the serous membranes that we talked about. The pleura, the peritoneum, and the pericardium. The parietal layer lines the internal surface of the fibrous pericardium, and the visceral layer, also called the epicardium, is on the external surface of the heart. Remember, that was true for all the serous membranes. You have the wall of the cavity, and then you have the organ itself. The visceral layer is on the organ itself. Viscera means organ. The parietal layer lines the wall. Parietal means wall. Separated by a fluid-filled pericardial cavity, which decreases friction. And I love it. I found these images on the internet of a guy who took medical images and then photoshopped his own head onto them. I think that's hilarious. If I'd thought of that first, I would have done it. There he is again. Inflammation of the serous pericardium is called pericarditis. Itis, remember, inflammation. Pericard, inflammation of the pericardium. Often viral, can follow bacterial pneumonia. Can hinder the production of serous fluid, which can cause a painful rubbing of the parietal and visceral layers. My mom had pericarditis, and it was so painful. She was bedridden. She could barely sit up in bed. It was just sitting up caused the two layers of the pericardium to scrape against one another, and it really it was extreme pain. You could see from her face. If you listen through a stethoscope, you can hear a creaking sound, which is the pericardial friction rub, characterized by pain deep to the sternum. So, layers of the heart wall. The epicardium is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. That's on the outermost layer. Then myocardium, myomuscle. These are spiral bundles of cardiac muscle cells, all right? The fibrous skeleton of the heart, crisscrossing, interlacing layer of connective tissue. It anchors cardiac muscle fibers. Supports the great vessels and valves, like the aorta and the vena cava. Limits the spread of action potentials to specific paths. So, basically what it does, in part, is it just makes sure that the heart beats as a single unit. That fibrous skeleton means that the whole heart is all interconnected, all right? Anchors it, supports it, and helps action potential spread in the correct pathways. Then the endocardium lines the inside of the heart muscle. So myocardium is in the middle, epicardium is the layer on the outside, endocardium is the layer on the inside, all right? And it's continuous with the lining of blood vessels. Chambers of the heart. So the heart in humans has 4 chambers, and reptiles has 3, although crocodiles have 4. 4 chambers, 2 atria that are separated by the interatrial septum. Septum we see a lot of. It means a divider, all right? So anytime you see septum, it's a divider. The coronary sulcus, remember sulcus in Bio 201, those were the grooves in the brain. Also called the atrioventricular groove. It circles the junction of the atria and the ventricles. So take a look at that heart, especially on the bottom illustration. See, there are 2 chambers on the top, the 2 atria, singular atrium, plural atria, and then on the bottom you see the 2 ventricles. Notice how on the bottom there's a septum as well, the interventricular septum, all right? And then the coronary sulcus, if you go back and look at the top, you can see there's adipose tissue. The coronary sulcus goes around the heart laterally. It separates the atria from the ventricles, all right? Then the auricles are little caps, basically, on top of the atria. They increase the atrial volume. You can see in the diagram on the top, you can see where it says auricle of the right atrium. They're just little caps, that's what they are. They increase the volume. Then down below, the two ventricles separated by the interventricular septum and the anterior and posterior interventricular sulci. So once again, looking at the top picture, see how there's the adipose going down the front of the heart. That's separating, that's right on top of the interventricular septum, and that basically separates the two ventricles. The sulci are where there's adipose tissue. It's also where arteries go. So the coronary sulcus is where arteries go around the heart, and the interventricular sulcus is where the arteries go down the heart. There's one both in the front and the back. All right, so atria, that's where blood comes in. They are the receiving chambers. Walls are ridged by pectinate muscles, little smooth muscles in there, cardiac muscles. Vessels entering the right atrium include the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Superior vena cava brings back all the blood from your head and from your arms, and the inferior vena cava brings back all the blood from the rest of your body, all right? They both enter the right atrium. So the right atrium is the input from all the blood coming back from your body. Then the coronary sinus is on the backside, the posterior of the heart. It's kind of a wide vein, and that's where the blood that the heart pumped to itself comes back. It also then drains into the right atrium. So there are three entry points of blood into the right atrium. The entry point for the superior vena cava, for the inferior vena cava, and for the coronary sinus. Vessels entering the left atrium, the right and left pulmonary veins. So these are the blood vessels coming back from your lungs. They are bringing back the blood that your lungs put oxygen into, and those come into the left atrium. So notice there's an asymmetry here. It's not as though the right atrium is for the right side of the body and the left atrium is for the left side of the body. That's not it at all. The right atrium is all of the body and the heart. The left atrium is just the lungs. So when I say all of the body except the lungs. The left atrium is where the pulmonary veins come in, both right and left, bringing blood back from both lungs. All right, you can see them in the bottom illustration there. You can see pulmonary arteries and pulmonary veins. All right, pulmonary veins is what we're talking about now. Those all enter the left atrium. So the atria were the receiving chambers. The ventricles are the discharging chambers. That's where blood gets pumped out of the heart. The walls are ridged by the trabeculae carnii. So remember in Bio 201 we studied the bones. Smooth bone had trabeculae. Literally that means a beam or a strut, like a 2x4. So inside of the ventricles there are all these little ridges. Those are the trabeculae carnii. So on the bottom illustration on the right, when you see all those ridges inside the ventricle, those are the trabeculae carnii. Carnii literally meat, carne. So the meaty beams. Then there are papillary muscles. They project into the ventricular cavities. Those are basically just trabeculae carnii that are sort of elongated. They are muscle. So vessel leaving the right ventricle is the pulmonary trunk. The vessel leaving the left ventricle is the aorta. So look again here. See the big giant red blood vessel on the bottom illustration. That's the aorta. Then on the right side of the illustration is the pulmonary trunk. Notice on the left side there's also big blue vessels. Those are the vena cava, all right? So vena cava are coming into the right atrium again. Those are bringing blood back from the ventricles, and it's kind of, you can't really see that it's the left ventricle that's pumping blood through the aorta, and the right ventricle is pumping blood through the pulmonary trunk. You can't see that just because there's heart muscle obscuring your view. So the aorta comes out of the left ventricle, And the pulmonary trunk comes out of the right ventricle. Pulmonary trunk goes to the lungs. Aorta carries blood to your body. So the visceral layer of the serous pericardium is the same as the what? The endocardium, the epicardium, the myocardium, the parietal layer of the serous pericardium, or the fibrous layer of the serous pericardium. What is it? It's called the epicardium. All right, we'll continue with the next one.